pulled through. He mended slowly. I had some fear of arrest, but the conspiracy of silence kept the facts under cover. It was partly due, I guess, to the friendship of John Wentworth for me and Honest Abe. He kept it out of the papers. There were no complaints and the rumors soon fell into silence. I spent about 6 weeks at Harry's bedside and in the store, which has begun to prosper. The boy, Mr. Nimble, is a cunning little man. When he began to get better, Harry loved to play with him and listen to his talk about fairies. The young man was able to leave his bed, by and by, but he didn't get over his weakness and pallor. He had no appetite. I sent him with Knuckles into the Wisconsin woods to live in the open. Then I took the small boy to Dixon with me in the saddle. Bim had just got back to her work. She was distressed by the news of Harry's condition. "I fear he has got his death blow," she said with a sad look in her face. "I had hoped that we could be married this autumn. But something comes between us always. First it was my folly and now it is his folly. It seems as if we hadn't sense enough to get married when there's nothing in the way of it." She told me that Eliphele Biggs had been there. He had heard of the boy and wished to see him and demanded to know where he was. For fear that Biggs would try to get possession of Mr. Nimble, I took him with me to Springfield in the saddle. I learn that Davis has recovered his health and left the city. A man cannot do business without friends, and after the trial Chicago was no place for him. Chapter 23, which presents the pleasant comedy of individualism in the new capital, and the courtship of Lincoln and Mary Todd. Samson, with Mr. Nimble on a pad stuffed with straw in front of him, jogged across the prairies and waded the creeks and sloughs on his way to Springfield. The little lad was in his 4th year that summer. He slept and talked much on the way and kept Samson busy with queries about the sky and the creeks and the great flowery meadows. They camped the first night in a belt of timber, and Samson writes that the boy slept snug against me with his head on my arm. He went to sleep crying for his mother. He adds, "It reminded me of the old days of my young fatherhood." Mr. Nimble wanted to pick all the flowers and splash his bare feet in every stream. In the evening he would talk to the stars as if he were playing with them. To him the whole world is a plaything. He is like some of the grown folks in Chicago. He would sit hanging on to the reins and talk to the horse and to God by the hour. He used to tell me that God was a friend of his, and I think he was right. It was good luck to get back to Sarah and the children. They took the little stranger into their hearts. Heart room, house room is the motto of this part of the country. It was a new town to which Samson returned. The governor and the state officers had moved to Springfield. The new capital was nearing completion. The hard times which had followed the downfall of 37 had unjustly diminished Mr. Lincoln's confidence in his ability as a legislator. He enjoyed the practice of the law, which had begun to turn his interest from the affairs of state. but the pot of political science boiled before the fireplace in the rear of Joshua Speed's store every evening that Lincoln and his associates were in Springfield. The wit and wisdom which bubbled into its vapors and the heat that surrounded it were the talk of the town. Many came to witness the process, and presently it was moved, for a time, to more accommodating quarters. Before a crowd of people in the Presbyterian Church, Lincoln, Logan, Baker and Browning for the Whigs, and Douglas, Calhoun, Lamborn and Thomas for the Democrats, having assiduously prepared for the trial, debated the burning issues of the time. The effort of each filled an evening, and Lincoln's speech gave him new hope of himself. Wise men began to have great confidence in his future. He had taken the style of Webster for his model. He no longer used the broad humor which had characterized his efforts on the stump. A study of the best speeches of the great New Englander had made him question its value in a public address. Dignity, clear reasoning and impressiveness were the chief aims of his new method, the latter of which is aptly illustrated by this passage from his speech in reply to Douglas in the debate mentioned: "If I ever feel the soul within me elevate and expand to those dimensions not wholly unworthy of its almighty architect, it is when I contemplate the cause of my country deserted by all the world besides, and I standing up boldly and alone and hurling defiance at her victorious oppressors. Here without contemplating consequences before high heaven and in the face of the world I swear eternal fidelity to the just cause, as I deem it, of the land of my life, my liberty and my love." In these perfervid utterances one may find little to admire save a great spirit seeking to express itself and lacking as yet the refinement of taste equal to his undertaking. He was no heaven-born genius sprung in full panoply from the head of Jove. He was just one of the slow, common folk, with a passion for justice and human rights, slowly feeling his way upward. His spirit was growing. Strong in its love and knowledge of common men and of the things necessary to their welfare, it was beginning to seek and know the divine power of words. Every moment of leisure he gave to the study of Webster and Burke and Byron and Shakespeare and Burns. He had begun to study the art of Irving and Walter Scott and of a new writer of the name of Dickens. There were 4 men who slept with him, in the room above Speed's store, and one of them has told how he used to lie sprawled on the floor, with his pillow and candle, reading long after the others had gone to sleep. Samson writes that he never knew a man who understood the art of using minutes as he did. A detached minute was to him a thing to be filled with value. Yet there were few men so deeply in love with fun. He loved to laugh at a storytelling and to match his humor with Thompson Campbell, a famous raconteur, and to play with children. Fun was as necessary to him as sleep. He searched for it in people and in books. He came often to Samson's house to play with Mr. Nimble and to talk with Joe. Some of his best thoughts came when he was talking with Joe, and some of his merriest moments when he was playing with Mr. Nimble. He confessed that it was the latter that reminded him that he had better be looking for a wife. But Lincoln was only one of many remarkable personalities in Springfield who had discovered themselves and were seeking to be discovered. Sundry individuals were lifting their heads above the crowd, but not with the modesty and self-distrust of Honest Abe. Steve Douglas, whom Samson had referred to as that little rooster of a man, put on the stilts of a brave and ponderous vigor. His 5-foot stature and his 100 pounds of weight did not fit the part of Achilles. But he would have no other. He blustered much with a spear too heavy for his hands. Lincoln used to call him a kind of pop gun. This free-for-all joust of individualism, one of the first fruits of freedom in the West, gave to the life of the little village a rich flavor of comedy. The great talents of Douglas had not been developed. His character was as yet shifty and shapeless. Some of the leading citizens openly distrusted him. He sought to command respect by assaulting men of full size and was repeatedly and soundly thumped for his presumption. He had endeavored publicly to chastise the sturdy Simeon Francis and had been bent over a market cart and severely wigged by the editor. Lincoln used to call these affairs the mistakes of Douglas, due wholly to the difference between the size of his body and the size of his feelings. He never liked this little man, in opposing whom he was to come to the fullness of his power on the platform. It is evident that Lincoln regarded him as an able advocate of small sincerity looking chiefly for personal advancement. There is a passage in the diary which illustrates the character of Douglas and Lincoln's knowledge of it. The passage relates to a day in the famous debates of 1858. Lincoln had not reached Havana in time to hear the speech of his opponent. A great crowd had come by train and in wagons. Taking advantage of his absence, Douglas had called Lincoln a liar, a coward and a sneak, and declared that he was going to fight him. Lincoln heard of this and said in his speech, "I shall not fight with Judge Douglas. A fight could prove nothing at issue in this campaign. It might prove that he is a more muscular man than I, or that I am a more muscular man than he, but this subject is not mentioned in either platform. Again, he and I are really very good friends, and when we are together he would no more think of fighting me than of fighting his wife." Therefore, when the judge talked about fighting, he was not giving vent to any ill feeling, but was trying to excite, well, let us say enthusiasm against me on the part of his audience. Justice accomplished her ends now and then with comic displays of violence in the prairie capital. One night Abe Lincoln and certain of his friends captured a shoemaker who had beaten his wife and held him at the village pump while the aggrieved woman gave him a sound thrashing. So this phase of imperialism was cured in Springfield by hair off the same dog, as Lincoln put it. One evening while E.D. Baker was speaking in the crowded village courtroom above Lincoln's office and was rudely interrupted and in danger of assault, the long legs of Honest Abe suddenly appeared through a scuttle hole in the ceiling above the platform. He leaped upon it and, seizing a stone water pitcher, defied anyone to interfere with the right of free speech in a worthy cause. So it will be seen that there were zestful moments in these sundry vindications of the principles of democracy in the prairie capital. About this time Miss Mary Todd, the daughter of a Kentucky banker, arrived in Springfield to visit her sister, Mrs. Ninian W. Edwards. She was a fashionably dressed, good-looking girl of blue-gray eyes and dark hair. She had been well educated in the schools of Lexington and could speak French as well as English. "Well, Mary, haven't you found the fortunate young man yet?" Mr. Edwards playfully asked the day of her coming. "You know my husband is going to be President of the United States and I hoped that I would find him in Springfield," Mary answered in a like vein. "There's great fishing here," said Mr. Edwards. "I know the very man you are looking for. He has come up from the ranks and is now the most popular member of the legislature. He can make a stirring speech and they say he is going to be the President of the United States. He's wise and witty and straight as a string but a rough diamond, big, awkward and homely. You're just the girl to take him in hand and give him a little polish and push him along. His name is Abraham Lincoln." Speed knew the Todds, a distinguished Kentucky family with a governor of Virginia and other historic figures in its record. When he called upon Mary, she asked about Mr. Lincoln and said she would like to meet him. "She's just the girl for you," Abe Speed said to him that evening. "She is bright and well educated and her family has influence. She could be a great help to you." This interested the member from Sangamon County, who was indeed eager to get along. The companionship of a refined young lady was the very thing he needed. "Let's go over and pay our respects to her," Speed suggested. They went, Lincoln being carefully dressed in his first suit of black clothes. Miss Todd was a bright, vivacious girl of middle stature, 22 years old. She was fashionably dressed and carried her head proudly, a smart-looking, witty, well-spoken girl but not especially handsome. She was most agreeable to the young men. Honest Abe was deeply impressed by her talk and fine manners and general comeliness. He felt her grace and charm and spoke of it, with enthusiasm. But to him and to her there seemed to be an impassable gulf between them. She changed her mind about that, however, when she heard him speak and felt the power of his personality and saw his face lighted by the candle of his spirit. It was a handsome face in those moments of high elation. Hardship and malarial poison had lined and sallowed his skin. He used to say that every time the fever and ague walked over him, they left a track on his face. The shadows of loneliness and sorrow were in its sculpturing. But when his eyes glowed with passion, one saw not the rough mask which the life of the pioneer had given him. His form lost its awkwardness, his face took on a noble and impressive beauty. Those times every eye looked longingly upon him because of the great and wonderful things with which he was interfused. To quote his own words to the boy, Josiah Trailer, his character was speaking as well as his lips. Mary had the insight to recognize his power. She felt the strength of his spirit. She agreed with her friends that here was a man of great promise. She felt the need of him. To one who loved beauty and respected women as he did, the grace and refinement of this young lady had a singular appeal, coupled as it was with the urge of his strong, masculine nature. It was a revelation. He was like a young poet going out into the open and seeing for the first time the mysterious beauty of the mountains or the exquisite, delicate, thin curve of the new moon in spring. He began to seek and study refinement of thought, of manner, of dress, of expression. He knew that he needed Mary but had the feeling that she was not for him. A woman who lived near the Edwards' house had a small, hairy, poodle dog. One day as Abe and Mary were walking along the street, they met this woman who asked if they had seen her dog. "I wouldn't wonder if someone down the street had got him tied to the end of a pole and is using him to swab off his windows," said Abe Lincoln with a good-natured laugh. "I'll try to find him for you." Mary enjoyed fun and this and like sallies of the young legislator added a certain zest to their friendship. Women are like children in their love of humor. The diminutive Douglas saw in Miss Todd an asset of much value and his attentions began to be assiduous. Mary was indifferent to his lofty manner and sonorous vocalism. Abe Lincoln liked her better for that. She encouraged the visits of the latter and invited his confidence. The fact filled him with a great joy. They went about together. In the Edwards parlor he modestly told her of his work and his life plan. She differed with him on certain subjects which were unfortunately fundamental. He did not love her as he had loved Anne. But her personality pleased and fascinated the young legislator. One evening under the spell of it he asked her to be his wife. She consented. Then he began to think it over. It was like Lincoln in his relations with women to get the cart before the horse, so to speak. The points upon which they disagreed came up for consideration. She could not think as he did on the subject of slavery and the kindred one of state rights. His manners were not like hers. He was 31 years old that summer. It was rather late in life to undertake any great change in his manners. They grew naturally out of one's history and character. He could be kind and gentle in his way. But, mainly, his manners would have to be like the rugged limbs of the oak. The grace and elegance of the water willow and the white birch were not for him. It saddened him to conclude that he would have to be for a long time just what he was, crude, awkward, unlearned in the graces and amenities of cultivated people. He rightly judged that his crudeness would be a constant source of irritation to the proud Mary. As their acquaintance progressed, the truth of his conviction grew more apparent. This, however, did not so much concern him as her lack of sympathy with some of his deepest motives. He decided that, after all, he did not love her and that to marry her would be committing a great wrong. Some of the unhappiest days of his life followed. His conscience gave him no rest. He knew not what to do. He told a friend that if his misery were equally distributed to the whole human race, each would have a troublesome burden. He was wont to take long walks into the country with Mr. Nimble those days, often carrying the boy on his shoulders. It is likely that the little lad was a great comfort to him. He wrote a letter to Miss Todd in which he reviewed the history of his thinking on the subject of their marriage and frankly but tenderly stated his conviction that it would imperil her happiness to marry him. Before sending it, he submitted the letter to his friend Speed. The latter read it over and looked very grave. "What do you think of it?" Lincoln asked. "I would never send a letter like that to a lady," Speed answered. "If you feel as you say, go and tell her so, but don't put it in a letter." Lincoln went to see her that evening and returned to his friend in a more cheerful mood. "Did you tell her?" Speed asked. "Yes, I told her." "What happened?" "She burst out crying and I threw my arms around her and kissed her and that settled it. We are going to be married." What an illustration of the humanity and chivalry of Honest Abe was in the proceeding. "I'm sure you'll get along all right together," said Speed. "Your spirit is jealous of anyone likely to get in its way." "But she won't. She'll fall in line and do what she can to help you." Now a little before this time Henry Brimstead and other creditors of Davis had gone to Chicago in the matter of the satisfaction of their judgment against him. Henry had driven a wagon across the prairies and, returning, had brought Bim and her mother to his home and then to Springfield. It was while they were there that Harry had come down to Chicago out of the woods in a condition of health which had alarmed his physician. The latter had put him on a steamboat and sent him east. He was bound for the mountain country in northern New York. Bim and her mother returned to Chicago on the stage, the former to take a place in the store as the representative of Samson's interest. Harry was 3 years in the wilderness trying to regain his health. Success came to him in the last year of his banishment. Toward the end of it he received a letter from Mr. Lincoln. It was written soon after that curious climax in the courting of Mary Todd. In this letter he said, "I am serving my last term in the legislature. I learn that you are in better health and I hope that you will have the strength and inclination to return soon and be a candidate for my seat in the House. Samson will not do it, being so busy with large affairs. You are young. You have won distinction in the service of your country. You have studied the problems of the county and the state. Samson and Baker and Logan and Browning agree with me that you are the man for the place. As for myself, I am going to be married in a year or so. I shall have to give all my time to the practice of the law. I am now in partnership with Stephen T. Logan and am slowly clearing my conscience of debt. I have done what I could for the state and for Sangamon County. It hasn't been much. I want you to take up the burden, if you can, until I get free of my debts at least. By and by I may jump into the ring again." Harry was glad to obey the summons. Soon after the arrival of Mr. Lincoln's letter his doctor gave the young man what he called an honorable discharge. The magic of youth and its courage and of good air had wrought a change of which the able doctor had had little hope in the beginning. In his travels through the great forest Harry had met David Parrish and Stephen Van Rensselaer, at whose homes on the shore of the St. Lawrence he had spent many a happy, summer day. 3 years had passed since that fateful morning on the prairie. Through the winters he had lived in a comfortable hunter's camp on the shore of Lake Placid. Summers he had wandered with a guide and canoe through the lakes and rivers of the wilderness, hunting and fishing and reading the law books which he had borrowed from Judge Fine of Ogdensburg. Each summer he worked down the Oswegatchie to that point for a visit with his new friends. The history of every week had been written to Bim, and her letters had reached him at the points where he was wont to rest in his travels. The lovers had not lost their ardor. Theirs was the love that hopes and endures and is patient. On a day in June, 1841, he boarded a steamboat at Ogdensburg on his way to Chicago. He arrived in the evening and found Samson at the home of Bim and her mother, a capacious and well-furnished house on Dearborn Street. Bim was then a little over 25 years old. A letter from John Wentworth says that she was an exquisite bit of womanhood, learned in the fine arts of speech and dress and manner. He spoke also of her humor and originality and of her gift for business, which amounted to absolute genius. The store had doubled in size under her management and with the help of the capital of Samson and Sarah Traylor. Its wholesale and retail business was larger than any north of St. Louis. The epidemic had seized her toward the last of her nursing and left the marks of its scourge upon her. It had marred her beauty, but Samson writes, the girl was still very handsome. She was well filled out and stood as straight as an arrow and was always dressed as neat as a pin. I fear she was a little extravagant about that. She carried her head like a sleek, well-fed Morgan colt. She was kind of scared to meet Harry for fear of what he'd think of those little marks on her face, but I told her not to worry. You are the smartest and loveliest looking creature that I ever saw in my life, said Harry after he had held her in his arms a moment. But see what has happened to me. Look at my face, she answered. It is more beautiful than ever, he said. Those marks have doubled my love for you. They are medals of honor, better than this one that I wear. Then I think that I'll take you off and marry you before you have a chance to fight another duel or find another war to go to, said Bim. There is the mustache that I used to long for and which wouldn't come, she added with a smile. Is there anything else that I seem to need? Harry asked. I could grow whiskers now. Don't, she answered. The great need of the West is shears and razors and a law to compel their use. There can be little romance in the midst of so much hair. I shall be careful not to offend you, Harry laughed. I want to marry you as soon as possible. I've been looking forward to that since I was 16. I don't hear of anything but love and marriage, said Samson. We've been rustling down at our house to keep Josiah from running off and getting married. He's engaged already. Engaged? To whom? Harry asked. To Annabel Brimstead. She's a little older than he is. She laughed at him and promised to marry him as soon as he was nominated for president by all his friends. She would now vote for him herself. He has become a good athlete and the best scholar in school. He has every boy and girl in the village working for him evenings and Saturdays. What are they doing? Harry asked. Making those newfangled things they call lucifers. You can build a fire in a second with them. They cut splinters out of soft wood, dip their ends in brimstone, which Joe learned how to make, and put them in a hot oven until the brimstone is baked. Then a scratch will bring a flame. Joe puts them up in bundles and sells them to the merchants and calls them lucifer matches. He has invented a machine that will cut and dip 1,000 splinters an hour. I tell you, Annabelle is in danger. He took a lucifer out of his pocket and scratched it on the bottom of his boot. The party looked with wonder at its flame, which quickly consumed the slender thread of pine in his fingers. I have always thought that Joe would make a whale of a man, said Harry. We all seem to be threatened with immediate and overwhelming happiness, Bim exclaimed. The only thing in the way of mine is the national debt that I have accumulated, Harry remarked. I knew he'd think of something, said Bim ruefully. If I wanted to abolish the noble institution of marriage, I'd make him chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. Harry, your credit is still good with me, and I'm prosperous, Samson began. I want you to know that Bim's energy and skill are mostly responsible for my success. I guess we owe more to your sickness than you're aware of. If it hadn't been for that, we would be plodding along at the same old pace. We would not have felt the need of speeding up. It was your misfortune that brought Bim into the store. If she wants to retire and marry you, I rather think she is entitled to do it. I don't want any more fooling around about this matter. Sarah and I couldn't stand it. She's kept me awake nights talking about it. The thing has worried us plenty. We rebel and demand action before anything else happens. We feel as if we had some rights in this case. I concede them and second your demand, Harry answered. Bim must name a near day. I only need a week to get some clothes made and to go up to Milwaukee on a little matter of business. I don't know whether we'll give him a week or not, said Bim playfully. A great many things may happen to him in a week. Chapter XV, which describes a pleasant holiday and a pretty stratagem. 2 days later, Bim suggested that they should take a day's ride in the open and spend the night at the home of a friend of hers in a settlement known as Plains End, Harry having expressed a wish to get out on the prairies in the saddle after his long term of travel on a steamboat. Are you sure that you can stand an all-day's journey? Bim asked. I could kill a bear with my hands and carry him home on my back and eat him for dinner, the young man boasted. I've got enough of the Wild West in me to like a man who can eat bears if there's nothing better, said Bim. I didn't know but you'd been spoiled in the homes of those Eastern millionaires. If you're willing to take what comes and make the best of it, I'll give you a day that you will remember. You will have to put up with a very simple hospitality, but I wouldn't wonder if you'd enjoy it. I can put up with anything so long as I have your help, the young man answered. Then I shall send word that we are coming. We will leave here day after tomorrow. Our horses will be at the door at 8 o'clock in the morning. We shall take some luncheon and reach our destination late in the afternoon and return next day. It will give us a good long visit with each other and you'll know me better before we get back. I want to know you as well as I love you, he said. I suppose it will be like studying law, one never gets through with it. I've found myself a rather abstruse subject, as bad as Coke, of which Abe used to talk so much with my father, she declared. I shall be glad if it doesn't discourage you. The mystery of women cannot be solved by intellectual processes, the young man remarked. Observation is the only help, and mine has been mostly telescopic. We have managed to keep ourselves separated by a great distance even when we were near each other. It has been like looking at a star with a very limited parallax. It's a joy to be able to see you with the naked eye. You will have little to look at on this holiday but me and the prairies, said Bim. I think the prairies will be neglected. I shall wear my cavalry uniform and try to get a pair of the best horses in Chicago for the trip. Then you would have to get mine. I have a handsome pair of black young horses from Ohio, real high steppers. It is to be my party. You will have to take what comes and make the best of it. The day of their journey arrived, a warm, bright, cloudless day in September 1841. The long story of those years of separation was told as they rode along. Biggs had been killed in a drunken brawl at Alton. Davis had gone to the far west, a thoroughly discredited man. Henry Brimstead had got his new plough on the market and was prospering beyond all his hopes. Eli had become a merchant of unusual ability and vision. His square dealing and good sense had done much to break down prejudice against the Jews in the democracy of the West. Agents of the store were traveling in Wisconsin, Illinois and Indiana selling its goods to country dealers. They carried with them the progressive and enlightened spirit of the city and the news. Everywhere they insisted upon a high standard of honesty in business. A man who had no respect for his contract was struck off the list. They spread the everyday religion of the counting room. They were a welcome, unifying and civilizing force in the middle country. Samson Traylor was getting wealth and a reputation for good sense. He had made the plan on which the business had developed. He had proved himself a wise and far-seeing man. Sarah's friends had been out in Springfield for a visit. They had invested money in the business. Her brother had decided to bring his family west and settle in Sangamon County. The lovers stopped in a grove at noon and fed their horses, and Harry, who had a bundle of Joe's lucifer matches in his pocket, a gift from Samson, built a fire and made a brooch of green sticks on which he broiled beefsteak. A letter from Harry to Sarah Traylor tells of the beauty of the day, of bluebells and scarlet lilies in the meadow grass, of the whistling quail, of pigeons and wild geese flying across the sky, and of his great joy in seeing again the vast sunlit reaches of the level, virgin lands. It was my great day of fulfillment, all the dearer because I had come back to health and youth and beloved scenes out of those years shadowed with loneliness and despair, he writes. The best part of it, I assure you, was the face I loved, and that musical voice ringing like a bell in merry laughter and in the songs which had stirred my heart in the days of its tender youth. You, the dear and gentle mother of my later boyhood, are entitled to know of my happiness when I heard that voice tell me in its sweeter tone of the love which has endured through all these years of stern trial. We talked of our plans as we sat among the ferns and mosses in the cool shade sweetened by the incense of burning faggots, over that repast to which we shall be returning often for refreshment in poorer days. We had thought of you and of the man so well beloved of you and us in all these plans. We shall live in Springfield so that we may be near you and him and our friend, honest Abe. It is a long letter presenting minute details in the history of that sentimental journey and allusion to matters which have no part in this record. Its substance being fully in the consciousness of the writer, he tenderly folds it up and returns it to the package, yellow and brittle and faded and having that curious fragrance of papers that have lain for scores of years in the gloom and silence of a locked mahogany drawer. So alive are these letters with the passion of youth in long forgotten years that the writer ties the old ribbon and returns them to their tomb with a feeling of sadness, finding a singular pathos in the contrast of their look and their contents. They are turning to dust, but the soul of them has gone into this little history. The young man and woman mounted their horses and resumed their journey. It was after 2 o'clock. The grand prairie lay ahead of them. The settlement of Plains End was 21 miles away on its farther side. They could just see its tall oak trees in the dim distance. "We must hurry if we get there before dark," said the girl. "Above all, we must be careful to keep our direction. It's easy to get lost down in the great prairie." They heard a catbird singing in a near thicket as they left their camp. It reminded Bim of her favorite ballad, and she sang it with the spirit of old. "My sweetheart, come along, don't you hear the glad song as the notes of the nightingale flow? Don't you hear the fond tale of the sweet nightingale as she sings in the valleys below? As she sings in the valleys below." They went on shoulder deep in the tall grass on the lower stretches of the prairie. Here and there it gave Harry the impression that he was swimming his horse in noisy, vivid green water. They startled a herd of deer and a number of wild horses. When they lost sight of the woods at Plains End, the young man, with his cavalry training, was able to ride standing on his saddle until he had got it located. It reminded him of riding in the Everglades, and he told of his adventures there as they went on, but very modestly. He said not a word of his heroic fight the day that he and 60 of his comrades were cut off and surrounded in the land of the grassy waters. But Bim had heard the story from other lips. Late in the afternoon the woods loomed in front of them scarcely a mile off. Near the end of the prairie they came to a road which led them past the door of a lonely cabin. It seemed to be deserted, but its windows were clean and a faint column of smoke rose from its chimney. There were hollyhocks and sunflowers in its small and cleanly dooryard. A morning glory vine had been trained around the windows. "Broad Creek is just beyond," said Bim. "I don't know how the crossing will be." They came presently to the creek, unexpectedly swollen. A man stood on the farther shore with some 70 feet of deep and rapid water between him and the travelers. "That man looks like Stephen Knuckles," said Harry. "It is Stephen Knuckles," Bim answered. "Hello, Steve," the young soldier called. "Howdy, boy," said the old minister. "That our creek is beilin' over. I reckon you'll have to swim the hoses. They're young city horses and not broke to deep water, but we'll try them," said Bim. They tried, but Bim's horse refused to go beyond good footing. "You kin light at that our house and spend the night, but the folks have gone away," the minister called. "I guess you'll have to marry us right here and now," Harry proposed. "Night is coming and that house is our only refuge." "Poor boy. There seems to be no escape for you," Bim exclaimed with a sigh. "Do you really and honestly want to marry me? If there's any doubt about it, I'll leave the horses with you and swim the creek. You could put them in the barn and swim with me, or spend the night in the cabin." He embraced and kissed her in a way that left no doubt of his wishes. "It's a cool evening and the creek is very wet," he answered. "I'm going to take this matter in my own hands." He called to the minister, "Steve, this is the luckiest moment of my life and you are just the man of all others I would have chosen for its most important job. Can you stand right where you are and marry us?" "You bet I kin, sir," the minister answered. "I've often said I could marry anyone half a mile away if they would only talk as loud as I kin. I've got the good book right here in my pocket, sir. My ol' woman is coming. She'll be here in a minute fur to witness the proceedings." Mrs. Knuckles made her appearance on the river bank in a short time. Then the minister shouted, "We'll begin by reading the 19th chapter of Matthew." He shouted the chapter and the usual queries, knelt and prayed and pronounced them man and wife. The young man and woman walked to the cabin and put their horses in its barn, where they found an abundance of hay and oats. They rapped at the cabin door but got no response. They lifted its latch and entered. A table stood in the middle of the room set for two. On its cover of spotless white linen were plates and cups and saucers and a big platter of roasted prairie chickens and a great frosted cake and preserves and jellies and potato salad and a pie and a bottle of currant wine. A clock was ticking on the shelf. There were live embers in the fireplace and wood in the box, and venison hanging in the chimney. The young soldier looked about him and smiled. "This is wonderful," he exclaimed. "To whom are we indebted? You don't think I'd bring you out here on the plains and marry you and not treat you well?" Bim laughed. "I warned you that you'd have to take what came and that the hospitality would be simple. It's a noble and benevolent conspiracy that has turned this cabin into a paradise and brought all this happiness upon me," he said as he kissed her. "I thought it strange that Mr. Knuckles should be on hand at the right moment." "The creek was a harder thing to manage," she answered with a smile. "I told my messenger to see that the gate of the reservoir was opened at 4 o'clock. So, you see, you had to marry or swim. Now I've made a clean breast of it. I felt sure something would happen before you got back from Milwaukee. I was plumb superstitious about it." The young man shook with laughter and said, "You are the new woman born of the democracy of the West." I began to fear that I should be an old woman before I got to be Mrs. Needles. "Whose house is this?" he asked in a moment. "It is the home of Mr. and Mrs. Peter Lukins. Their land near Chicago is now used for a cattle yard and slaughterhouse and is paying them a good income. They moved here some time ago. He looks after the reservoir. Mrs. Lukins is a famous cook, as you will see. We can stay here as long as we want to. We shall find everything we need in the well, the chimney, the butterwhey and the cellar. And here is the wedding supper all ready for us, and I as hungry as a bear." In the words of Mrs. Lukins, it is very copacetic, and I begin to feel that I have made some progress in the study of Bim Kelso. "Come, let's have our supper." "Not until you have broiled a piece of venison. It will take a lot of food to satisfy me. I'll get the cream and butter out of the well and make a pot of coffee. Hurry up, Harry, I'm starving." Darkness fell upon the busy lovers, and soon the firelight and the glow of many candles filled the homely cabin with flickering shadows and a soft, beautiful color. "Supper is ready," she said, when the venison steak had been deposited on the platter. "Bim, I love you not as most men love," he said as they stood a moment by the side of the table. "From the bottom of my heart I do respect you for your honor and good faith, and when I think of that and of all you have suffered for my sake, I bow my head and ask God to make me worthy of such a helper." They sat down to this unusual wedding feast, and as we leave them the windows of the little cabin fling their light far out upon the level plain, we hear the sound of merry laughter and of the tall grasses rustling and reeling joyously in the breeze. The moon in mid-heaven and the innumerable host around it seem to know what is passing on the edge of the grand prairie and to be well pleased. Surely there is nothing that finds a quicker echo in the great heart of the world than human happiness. Chapter XXV being a brief memoir by the honorable and venerable man known in these pages as Josiah Traylor, who saw the great procession of events between Andrew Jackson and Woodrow Wilson, and especially the making and the end of Lincoln. Now, as I have done often sitting in the chimney corner at the day's end, I look back at my youth and manhood and tell, with one eye upon the clock, of those years of fulfillment in the progress of our beloved pilgrim. There are 24 of them that I shall try to review in as many minutes. At this distance I see only the high places, one looming above another like steps in a stairway. The years of building and sentiment ended on the 4th of November, 1842, when he and Mary Todd were joined in marriage. Now, like one having taken note of the storm clouds, he strengthens the structure. Mary tried to teach him fine manners. It was a difficult undertaking. Often, as might have been expected, she lost her patience. Mary was an excellent girl, but rather kindlesome and pragmatic. Like most of the prairie folk, for instance, Abe Lincoln had been accustomed to reach for the butter with his own knife, and to find rest in attitudes extremely indolent and unbecoming. He enjoyed sprawling on the floor in his shirt sleeves and slippers with a pillow under his head and a book in his hand. He had a liking for ample accommodation not fully satisfied by a bed or a lounge. Mary undertook to turn him into new ways, and naturally there was irritation in the house, but I think they got along very well together for all that. Mary grew fond of him and proud of his great talents and was a devoted wife. For years she did the work of the house and bore him children. He milked the cow and took care of the horse when he was at home. Annabel and I, having just been married, went with him to Washington on our wedding tour in 1847. He was taking his seat in Congress that year. We were with him there when he met Webster. Lincoln was deeply impressed by the quiet dignity of the great man. We went together to hear Emerson lecture. It was a motley audience: businessmen, fashionable ladies and gentlemen, statesmen, politicians, women with their knitting, and lion hunters. The tall, awkward orator ascended the platform, took off his top coat and drew a manuscript from his pocket. He had a narrow, sloping forehead, a prominent nose, grey eyes and a skin of singular transparency. His voice was rich and mellow but not strong. Lincoln listened with rapt attention to his talk about democracy. It was a memorable night. He spoke of it often. Such contact with the great spirits of that time, of which he studiously availed himself in Washington, was of great value to the statesman from Illinois. His experiences on the floor were in no way important to him, but since 1914 I have thought often of what he said there, regarding Polk's invasion of Mexico, unauthorized by Congress as it was. The provision of the Constitution giving the war-making power to Congress was dictated, as I understand it, by the following reasons. Kings had always been involving and impoverishing their people in wars, pretending generally that the good of the people was the object. This our convention understood to be the most oppressive of all kingly oppressions, and they proposed to so frame the Constitution that no man should hold the power of bringing this oppression upon us. The next year he stumped Massachusetts for Zach Taylor and heard Governor Sword deliver his remarkable speech on slavery, which contained this striking utterance: Congress has no power to inhibit any duty commanded by God on Mount Sinai or by his Son on the Mount of Olives. On his return home, Lincoln confessed that we had soon to deal with that question. I was in his office when Herndon said, "I tell you that slavery must be rooted out." "What makes you think so?" Mr. Lincoln asked. "I feel it in my bones," was Herndon's answer. After that he used to speak with respect of Bill Herndon's bone philosophy. His term in Congress having ended, he came back to the law in partnership with William H. Herndon, a man of character and sound judgment. Those days Lincoln wore black trousers, coat and stock, a waistcoat of satin and a Wellington high hat. He was wont to carry his papers in his hat. Mary had wrought a great change in his external appearance. They used to call him a dead square lawyer. I remember that once Herndon had drawn up a fictitious plea founded on a shrewd assumption. Lincoln carefully examined the papers. "Is it founded on fact?" he asked. No, Herndon answered. Lincoln scratched his head thoughtfully and asked, Billy, hadn't we better withdraw that plea? You know it's a sham, and generally that's another name for a lie. Don't let it go on record. The cursed thing may come staring us in the face long after this suit has been forgotten. On the whole, he was not so communicative as he had been in his young manhood. He suffered days of depression when he said little. Often, in good company, he seemed to be thinking of things in no way connected with the talk. Many called him a rather shut-mouthed man. Herndon used to say that the only thing he had against Lincoln was his habit of coming in mornings and sprawling on the lounge and reading aloud from the newspaper. The people of the town loved him. One day as we were walking along the street together, we came upon a girl dressed up and crying in front of her father's door. "What's the matter?" Lincoln asked. "I want to take the train and the wagon hasn't come for my trunk," said she. Lincoln went in and got the trunk and carried it to the station on his back, with people laughing and throwing jokes at him as he strode along. When I think of him, his chivalry and kindness come first to mind. He read much, but his days of book study were nearly ended. His learning was now got mostly in the school of experience. Herndon says, and I think it is true, that he never read to the end of a law book those days. The study of authorities was left to the junior partner. His reading was mostly outside the law. His knowledge of science was derived from Chambers's Vestiges of the Natural History of Creation. He was still afraid of the abolition movement in 1852 and left town to avoid a convention of its adherents. He thought the effort to resist by force the laws of Kansas was criminal and would hurt the cause of freedom. "Let us have peace and revolutionize through the ballot box," he urged. In 1854 a little quarrel in New York began to weave the thread of destiny. Seward, Weed and Greeley had wielded decisive power in the party councils of that state. Seward was a high-headed, popular idol. His plans and his triumphant progress absorbed his thought. Weed was dazzled by the splendor of this great star. Neither gave a thought to their able colleague, a poor man struggling to build up a great newspaper. An office, with fair pay, would have been a help to him those days. But he got no recognition of his needs and talents and services. Suddenly he wrote a letter to Weed in which he said, "The firm of Seward, Weed and Greeley is hereby dissolved by the resignation of its junior member." When Greeley had grown in power and wisdom until his name was known and honored from ocean to ocean, they tried to make peace with him, but in vain. Then suddenly a new party and a new Lincoln were born on the same day in 1856 at a great meeting in Bloomington, Illinois. There his soul was to come into its stateliest mansion out of its lower vaulted past. For him the fullness of time had arrived. He was prepared for it. His intellect had also reached the fullness of its power. Now his great right hand was ready for the thunderbolts which his spirit had been slowly forging. God called him in the voices of the crowd. He was quick to answer. He went up the steps to the platform. I saw, as he came forward, that he had taken the cross upon him. Oh, it was a memorable thing to see the smothered flame of his spirit leaping into his face. His hands were on his hips. He seemed to grow taller as he advanced. The look of him reminds me now of what the famous bronze founder in Paris said of the death mask, that it was the most beautiful head and face he had ever seen. What shall I say of his words save that it seemed to me that the voice of God was in them? I never saw an audience so taken up and swept away. The reporters forgot to report. It is a lost speech. There is no record of it. I suppose it was scribbled with a pencil on scraps of paper and on the backs of envelopes at sundry times, agreeably with his habit, and committed to memory. So this great speech, called by some the noblest effort of his life, was never printed. I remember one sentence relating to the Nebraska bill, "Let us use ballots, not bullets, against the weapons of violence, which are those of kingcraft. Their fruits are the dying bed of the fearless Sumner, the ruins of the Free State Hotel, the smoking timbers of the Herald of Freedom, the governor of Kansas chained to a stake like a horse thief." In June, 1858, he took the longest step of all. The Republican State Convention had endorsed him for the United States Senate. It was then that he wrote on envelopes and scraps of paper at odd moments, when his mind was off duty, the speech beginning, "A house divided against itself must fall. Our government cannot long endure part slave and part free." I was among the dozen friends to whom he read that speech in the State House Library. One said of those first sentences, "It is a fool utterance." Another, "It is ahead of its time." Another declared that it would drive away the Democrats who had lately joined the party. Herndon and I were the only ones who approved it. Lincoln had come to another fork in the road. For a moment I wondered which way he would go. Immediately he rose and said with an emphasis that silenced opposition, "Friends, this thing has been held back long enough. The time has come when these sentiments should be uttered, and if it is decreed that I shall go down because of this speech, then let me go down linked to the truth." His conscience had prevailed. The speech was delivered. Douglas, the Democratic candidate, came on from Washington to answer it. That led to Lincoln's challenge to a joint debate. I was with him through that long campaign. Douglas was the more finished orator. Lincoln spoke as he split rails. His conscience was his beetle. It drove his arguments deep into the souls of his hearers. The great thing about him was his conscience. Unless his theme were big enough to give it play in noble words, he could be as commonplace as anyone. He was built for a tool of God in tremendous moral issues. He was awkward and diffident in beginning a speech. Often his hands were locked behind him. He gesticulated more with his head than his hands. He stood square-toed always. He never walked about on the platform. He scored his points with the long, bony, index finger of his right hand. Sometimes he would hang a hand on the lapel of his coat as if to rest it. Perspiration dripped from his face. His voice, high-pitched at first, mellowed into a pleasant sound. One sentence in Lincoln's speech at Ottawa thrust the little giant of Illinois out of his way forever. It was this pregnant query: can the people of a United States territory in any lawful way and against the wish of any citizen of the United States exclude slavery from its limits prior to the formation of a state constitution? He knew that Douglas would answer yes, and that, doing so, he would alienate the South and destroy his chance to be president 2 years later. That is exactly what came to pass. The little giant's answer was the famous Freeport heresy. He was elected to the Senate but was no longer possible as a candidate for the presidency. I come now to the last step in the career of my friend and beloved master. It was the Republican Convention of 1860 in Chicago. I was a delegate. The New Yorkers came in white beaver hats, enthusiastic for Seward, their favorite son. He was the man we dreaded most. Many in the great crowd were wearing his colors. The delegations were in earnest session the night before the balloting began. The hotel corridors were thronged with excited men. My father had become a man of wealth and great influence in Illinois. I was with him when he went into the meeting of the Michigan delegates and talked to them. He told how he came west in a wagon and saw the Spirit of America in the water floods of Niagara, and went on to the cabin village of New Salem and saw again the Spirit of America in the life of the boy, Abe Lincoln, then flowing toward its manhood. When he sat down, the Honorable Dennis Flanagan arose and told of meeting the trailer party at the falls when he was driving an ox team, in a tall beaver hat, how he had remembered their good advice and cookies and jerked venison. "Gentlemen," he said, "I am willing to take the word of a man whose name is hallowed by my dearest recollections. And believing what he has said of Abraham Lincoln, I am for him on the second ballot." The green Irish lad, whom I remember dimly, had become a great political chieftain, and his words had much effect. There was a stir among the delegates. I turned and saw the tall form of Horace Greeley entering the door. His big, full face looked rather serious. He wore gold-bowed spectacles. He was smooth-shaven save for the silken, white, throat beard that came out from under his collar. His head was bald on top with soft, silvered locks over each ear. He was a picturesque and appealing figure. They called on him to speak. He stepped forward and said slowly in a high-pitched drawl, "Gentlemen, this is my speech. On your second ballot, vote for Abraham Lincoln of Illinois." He bowed and left the room and visited many delegations, and everywhere expressed his convictions in this formula. Backed by his tremendous personality and influence, the simple words were impressive. I doubt not they turned scores of men from Seward to the great son of Illinois. Then, the campaign with its crowds, its enthusiasm, its Vesuvian mutterings. There was a curious touch of humor and history in its banners. Here are 3 of them: Menard County for the tall sucker. We are for old Abe the giant killer. Link on to Lincoln. Then, those last days in Springfield. He came to the office the afternoon before he left and threw himself on the lounge and talked of bygone days with Herndon. "Billy, how long have we been together?" he asked. 16 years. Never a cross word. Never. Keep the old sign hanging. A little thing like the election of a president should make no change in the firm of Lincoln and Herndon. If I live I'm coming back sometime and then we'll go right on with the practice of the law as if nothing had happened. Then, that Monday morning in Springfield when at 8 o'clock on the 11th of February the train bore him toward the great task of his life. Hannah Armstrong, who had foxed his trousers in New Salem, and the venerable Dr. Allen and the Brimsteads, and Alec Ferguson, bent with age, and Harry Needles and Bim and their 4 handsome children, and my father and mother, and Betsy, my maiden sister, and Eli Friedenberg were there in the crowd to bid him goodbye. A quartet sang. Mr. Lincoln asked his friends and neighbors to pray for his success. He was moved by the sight of them and could not have said much if he had tried. The bell rang. The train started. He waved his hand and was gone. Not many of us who stood trying to see through our tears were again to look upon him. The years of preparation were ended and those of sacrifice had begun. Now, we are at the foot of the last hill. For a long time I had seen it looming in the distance. Those days it filled my heart with a great fear. Now, how beautiful, how lonely it seems. Oh, but what a vineyard in that very fruitful hill. I speak low when I think of it. Harry Needles and I were on our way to Washington that fateful night of the 14th of April, 1865. We reached there at an early hour in the morning. We made our way through the crowded streets to the little house opposite Ford's Theatre. An officer who knew me cleared a way for us to the door. Reporters, statesmen, citizens and their families were massed in the street waiting with tear-stained faces for the end. Some of them were sobbing as we passed. We were admitted without delay. A minister and the doctor sat by the bedside. The latter held an open watch in his hand. I could hear it ticking the last moments in an age of history. What a silence as the great soul of my friend was breaking camp to go home. Friends of the family and members of the cabinet were in the room. Through the open door of a room beyond I saw Mrs. Lincoln and the children and others. We looked at our friend lying on the bed. His kindly face was pale and haggard. He breathed faintly and at long intervals. His end was near. Poor Abe! Harry whispered as we looked down at him. He has had to die on the cross. To most of those others Lincoln was the great statesman. To Harry he was still the beloved Abe who had shared his fare and his hardships in many a long, weary way. The doctor put his ear against the breast of the dying man. There was a moment in which we could hear the voices in the street. The doctor rose and said, "He is gone." Secretary Stanton, who more than once had spoken lightly of him, came to the bedside and tenderly closed the eyes of his master, saying, "Now, he belongs to the ages. We went out of the door. The sound of morning was in the streets. A dozen bells were tolling. On the corner of 10th Street a quartet of Negroes was singing that wonderful prayer, "Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home." One of them, whose rich, deep bass thrilled me and all who heard it, was Roger Wentworth, the fugitive, who had come to our house with Bim, in the darkness of the night, long before the end. End of the Project Gutenberg ebook A Man for the Ages, a story of the builders of democracy. Updated editions will replace the previous one, the old editions will be renamed. Creating the works from print editions not protected by U.S. copyright law means that no one owns a United States copyright in these works, so the Foundation, and you, can copy and distribute it in the United States without permission and without paying copyright royalties. Special rules, set forth in the general terms of use part of this license, apply to copying and distributing Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol concept and trademark. Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark, and may not be used if you charge for an ebook, except by following the terms of the trademark license, including paying royalties for use of the Project Gutenberg trademark. If you do not charge anything for copies of this ebook, complying with the trademark license is very easy. You may use this ebook for nearly any purpose such as creation of derivative works, reports, performances and research. Project Gutenberg ebooks may be modified and printed and given away. You may do practically anything in the United States with ebooks not protected by U.S. copyright law. Redistribution is subject to the trademark license, especially commercial redistribution. Start. Full license. The full Project Gutenberg license. Please read this before you distribute or use this work to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol mission of promoting the free distribution of electronic works. By using or distributing this work, or any other work associated in any way with the phrase Project Gutenberg, you agree to comply with all the terms of the full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license available with this file or online at www.gutenberg.org/license. Section 1. General Terms of Use and Redistributing Project Gutenberg Trademark Symbol Electronic Works 1.0. By reading or using any part of this Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work, you indicate that you have read, understand, agree to and accept all the terms of this license and intellectual property, trademark/copyright, agreement. If you do not agree to abide by all the terms of this agreement, you must cease using and return or destroy all copies of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works in your possession. If you paid a fee for obtaining a copy of or access to a Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work and you do not agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement, you may obtain a refund from the person or entity to whom you paid the fee as set forth in paragraph 1.e.8. 1.b Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark. It may only be used on or associated in any way with an electronic work by people who agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement. There are a few things that you can do with most Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works even without complying with the full terms of this agreement. See paragraph 1.c below. There are a lot of things you can do with Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works if you follow the terms of this agreement and help preserve free future access to Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works. See paragraph 1.e below. 1.c. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the Foundation or PGLAF, owns a compilation copyright in the collection of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works. Nearly all the individual works in the collection are in the public domain in the United States. If an individual work is unprotected by copyright law in the United States and you are located in the United States, we do not claim a right to prevent you from copying, distributing, performing, displaying or creating derivative works based on the work as long as all references to Project Gutenberg are removed. Of course, we hope that you will support the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol mission of promoting free access to electronic works by freely sharing Project Gutenberg trademark symbol works in compliance with the terms of this agreement for keeping the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol name associated with the work. You can easily comply with the terms of this agreement by keeping this work in the same format with its attached full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license when you share it without charge with others. 1.d. The copyright laws of the place where you are located also govern what you can do with this work. Copyright laws in most countries are in a constant state of change. If you are outside the United States, check the laws of your country in addition to the terms of this agreement before downloading, copying, displaying, performing, distributing or creating derivative works based on this work or any other Project Gutenberg trademark symbol work. The Foundation makes no representations concerning the copyright status of any work in any country other than the United States. 1.e. Unless you have removed all references to Project Gutenberg, 1.e.1. The following sentence, with active links to the immediate access to